I want to thank Keith. I want to thank all of you, and I want to thank Linda for that introduction. I've really enjoyed watching her work and the leadership she's done. And I have to say, and she agrees with me on this totally, neither of us have ever worked with anyone more systematically effective than Brooke Rollins. And she is an astonishing leader. And I think the America First Policy Institute is going to do for the next few years what the Heritage Foundation did in 1979, 1980. I keep on my desk a copy of the 1,093-page report that the Heritage Foundation wrote for Ronald Reagan. 250 experts, each took their area. They wrote the report. Reagan got elected, and at the first cabinet meeting, Ed Meese put a copy of the report on the table and said to the cabinet, "This is the policy of this administration." And they hired most of the 250 people who had written the report to go actually execute the report. I think because of the experience of the 4 years under President Trump, we have a seasoned enough cadre that if we work at it methodically, we can actually have an enormous impact on profoundly reshaping the federal government. And I think in that sense that the American First Policy Institute is very important. And I think this agenda is a very good starting point. And I want to emphasize that concept, starting point. This is going to be a long dialogue. We're going to learn a lot. The world's going to change. And as we're doing it, we're going to continue to apply ideas in a way that for the Republican Party I grew up in would have been unthinkable because it would have actually required reading books. I also want to say as I look out over this, and I'm kind of amazed, it's not I've been around so long. I have so many friends at almost every single table. People who I admire, people who I've worked with. It's just remarkable to me to see all of you here. And I'm very grateful to be back with friends at a historic moment. And when I look out at Kellyanne, I look at Keith Kellogg, and there's so many people around here that are just remarkable. And I really want to try to be worthy of your time and your attention. I want to start, however, with a personal note about an immediate situation. I feel very strongly that Speaker Pelosi should go to Taiwan. And that she should take a bipartisan congressional delegation. I can say this with some authority. I am the highest ranking American official ever to visit Taiwan. In 1997, I led a delegation, and John Dingell, the senior Democrat, was on the delegation. It was a truly bipartisan group. And it was a funny little story that relates to where we are right now. We'd been having some tension. In fact, President Clinton at one point sent 2 U.S. aircraft carriers through the Taiwan Straits to communicate sincerity. I had been invited by Beijing to come and give a speech both in Shanghai and in Beijing. And then we told them, after this had all been announced, that we were going to go to Taiwan. And they were furious. And their ambassador called Gardner Peckham, who was handling national security and was our trip planner. And I remember he happened to be in my office when he took the call. And at one point he says, "The Chinese Communist Party does not dictate the travel plans of the American Speaker of the House, period." And he went on to say, if it offends you too much, he will skip China and go to Taiwan. At which point they said, well, actually, as long as he agrees not to fly direct. So we ended up going China, Japan, Taiwan, Japan. And they grudgingly accepted that. Now let me apply it to where we are now. You have the normal attitude of the State Department, which is timidity covered by insecurity. And an eagerness to appease people who aren't Americans. You have, unlike 1997, when we had a Defense Department that actually focused on defense, you have a woke Defense Department which is as timid as the State Department, which is really dangerous. So I saw some article this morning that the Defense Department is very worried that Speaker Pelosi will somehow cause a problem if she goes to Taiwan. Well, my first suggestion is this. If the Department of Defense is not certain that it can protect an American Speaker of the House in a public visit, why would we think they could protect Taiwan? And if you're the Chinese communists and you watch us flinch after the total mess in Afghanistan, the total mess in Ukraine, you begin to think this is an administration that's just begging to be bullied. And so I commend Nancy. We have enormous disagreements on 98 or 99% of the things. But on this one, I think her instinct is right. I hope she sticks to her guns. And the only thing I would suggest is that she should make it a bipartisan congressional delegation to show that both parties are committed to the independence of Taiwan. I wanted to take that brief moment. Now, I'm going to talk about some relatively unusual things because, we're dealing with a Democratic Party which doesn't allow you to not talk about unusual things. This morning, I was doing some research because I was born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I am fascinated by the Senate race. I've known Dr. Oz for over 20 years. I once had a Center for Health Transformation. He worked with us. And John Fetterman, the lieutenant governor, is almost the perfect caricature of what we're going to be running against this fall. Fetterman took down the American flag in his office in the Capitol to put up the marijuana flag and the gay pride flag. Now, that might work at Berkeley. It would work at Yale. But any of you who know Pennsylvania very well know that the idea that the next time a soldier goes in to rescue somebody, instead of showing them the American flag patch, they're going to show them the marijuana patch, tells you about as much about wokeness as you need to know. And I think that Fetterman has to carry the burden, first of all, of being Fetterman, who's kind of nuts. Second, he has to, which in the Democratic Party means he's sort of a centrist. Second, he has to carry the burden of an enormous murder rate and crime rate in Philadelphia. And third, he has to carry the burden of a very anti-energy policy in western Pennsylvania, which is the fourth largest producer of energy in the United States. And then in the middle of the state, which is a very conservative area, which actually voted for Ralph Landon over Franklin Roosevelt, he's got to carry the burden of just being himself. So I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I hope Rick Scott's not going to be too unhappy with me. We will win the Pennsylvania Senate race. We will win it by a surprising margin. And for the foreseeable future, the marijuana flag will not fly at the U.S. Capitol. I know it's bold, but, several years ago, Bernie Marcus, the co-founder of Home Depot, came to me and said, given the work I'd done with Reagan and then the work we did with Contract with America, would I create an American Majority Project to try to really find out, are there issues that could bring us together in such large numbers that we could govern for several generations? And so we have been doing a lot of polling and focus groups now since 2018. All of us available to any American, or anybody else in the world for that matter, at AmericanMajorityProject.com. Now, I want to share with you, because I keep telling people, we're going to have a huge victory this fall, but it's not going to be a red tide. It's going to be an American tsunami, not Republican, not conservative, American. It starts with a comment that Joe Gaylord suggested to me and we tested, which is, do you think it is important to restore the America that works? 87% said yes. Now, first of all, that means that 87% thinks that something has to be restored because it's not working. But second, I learned a lesson many, many years ago. I first met with Ronald Reagan in 1974, first time I ran for Congress. In fact, most of what I learned about giving speeches came from Reagan. And Reagan had a very simple rule. Find an 80% issue, stand next to it and smile. Your opponent has two choices. They can stand in your shadow and nod yes, or they can stand with the less than 20% and frown. And given the nature of Americans, if you're with an 80%, even if the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the rest of the propaganda mill is opposed to you, at 80%, they can't erode you below 50. You stand next to a 51% issue, they can erode you. And Reagan understood this very, very deeply. And it's something I really worked on. In 1984, I headed up a truth squad that went out to San Francisco. And we would every morning hold a press briefing. And Walter Mondale, you may remember, got up in his acceptance speech. And he said, the other guy is going to raise your taxes, but he won't admit it. But I want you to know, if you elect me, I will raise your taxes. We closed down our shop. Didn't have another press briefing. We followed the Woodrow Wilson rule, never murder a man who's in the process of committing suicide. And of course, you went into a general election of, would you like to have higher taxes or lower taxes? Reagan, having cleverly figured out lower taxes would work better than higher taxes, and Mondale, being a good liberal Democrat, couldn't quite understand that. So I think we could have an American tsunami. But here's where we need your help, and this is why the team that Brooke has assembled is so important. The American people want solutions. They want values and they want solutions. They don't want one or the other. If you're out there today, there's a woman in Western Pennsylvania who is quoted as saying that she had to go to 4 or 5 stores to find baby formula, and given the price of gasoline, she couldn't afford to go to 4 or 5 stores. Now, she wants to know that there is somebody in America who cares enough about her that they're going to try to solve both problems. That is, make sure baby formula is available without having to go to 5 stores, and making sure you can afford to buy gasoline. These are very practical, very down-to-earth, very real propositions. I think we're going to have a tsunami, and I'm going to explain how to get there, which is not the Republican norm, by the way, because there are 2 really big parts to get to the tsunami. The first is campaign everywhere. Don't say, oh yeah, those are the Republicans, that's the Republican side of town. When you get double the price of gasoline, when you get a 38% increase in the murder rate in New York in 1 year, when you have millions of people crossing the border illegally, when you can't afford to buy the food you used to buy, everybody's available. And I tell every candidate, the number 1 and number 2 places to campaign are simple: gas stations and grocery stores. Because that's where people are going to be reminded that whatever Biden said yesterday was a lie, or he just didn't know. Because, all these liberal Democrats get in a government-funded car to be driven by a government chauffeur to go to a government airplane, and then they go, I don't know why you're worried about the price of gasoline. It doesn't affect me. Well, it affects everybody else in America, so I'm willing to make a swap. They can have everybody vote for them who rides around in a government-sponsored car, and we'll get everybody else. Now, that gets to be a pretty big majority. And we have that potential. In 1980, actually the first contract with America was Ronald Reagan. And the first Capitol Steps event was Ronald Reagan. In September of 1980, we brought every Republican federal candidate in the country to the Capitol Steps. David Broder wrote a column saying it was a tremendously courageous step by Reagan, because instead of running as an individual, he was deliberately running as head of a team which, by the way, in 1975 was a 13% identity in the country. We had collapsed that badly. Well, what happened? All of these candidates stood next to Reagan and pledged 5 things. We won 12 Senate seats, 5 of them by a combined total of 75,000 votes. We won control of the Senate for the first time since 1954. Nobody expected it. None of the Washington consultants expected it. Nobody who has a reputation would go out on a limb and say, oh yeah, after Reagan wins the biggest electoral vote against an incumbent president, he's also going to have coattails that bring in 12 senators. Nobody would have said that. So you move forward to 1994. All we did was, to be honest, and this is why this is so important, we were standing on Reagan's shoulders. And the truth is, although President Trump doesn't always want to admit it, Trump is standing on Reagan's shoulders. The fact is, Reagan set the base for modern conservative government in America. So Reagan in 1965, running for governor, is for welfare reform. We get it signed into law in 96. Reagan is for supply-side tax cuts. We passed the largest capital gains tax cut in history. Go down a whole list of these things. And building on what we had done in 1980, we had a capital steps event, and we had people pledged to a contract. Now, I'm going to give you a secret about this in a second, but let me just say I'm confident that Kevin McCarthy is going to, in fact, have he's currently, I think, calling it a covenant with America, but it's essentially the same concept. There will be a positive House Republican document which will in many ways parallel this and be very compatible with it, and which will be designed to do two things. One, to win the election, and two, to set a standard for you next year to measure the House Republicans about whether or not they keep their word. With your help, and I know that Senator Scott agrees on this, with your help, I'm sure we will convince the senators that they should actually stand for something and that they should actually give their word, or whether they want to adopt the House document. Look, I'm a creature of the House. I'm a Speaker of the House, but I get it. I always tell people the Senate is a country club, the House is a truck stop. So I understand, you can't go to the members of the club and say, why don't you join the truck stop? I mean, it didn't work in '94 and it won't work this year. But I do think the senators have an obligation to also come up with something. Now, there's one last big thing I want to talk about here. And I need your help, because this goes against the psychology of most of our professionals and the psychology of most of our consultants. Every temptation in our modern 24-hour news system is to run small campaigns. You rush around. I mean, the January 6th committee is a perfect example. It is a Stalinist show trial disguised as a congressional hearing. It's because the national elite is so deeply, bitterly anti-Trump. It's given free time and at prime time, which means more people are watching Netflix and are watching other programs than ever in history because they're hiding from the junk that's being forced on them. But the national news media would love to rush up to you and say, what did you think about Revelation number 217 last night? Wasn't it horrifying? To which the correct answer is, why don't you get a life? I mean, go watch a soccer game or watch baseball. The average American is ready for a big campaign, not a small campaign. And a big campaign, it's a very simple model. We run a small campaign in Georgia. Warnock might win. He's very articulate. He's a professional preacher. He's got a huge amount of money. And he will run around trying to destroy the Republican nominee, Herschel Walker, with every possible distortion, misinformation, etc. That's a small campaign. Might work. Unless we convince everybody that the actual ticket is the Warnock-Biden ticket. That 9% inflation, that's Warnock. Highest price of gasoline, that's Warnock. Can't afford to buy food, that's Warnock. Million people crossing the border, that's Warnock. We run a big campaign, this is true in every state in the country. We run a big campaign on big issues. We campaign in every part of every state. We win. Part of what got us to this, I'll give you two quick numbers. Part of what got us to this was testing, Larry Kudlow's suggestion, the concept of big government socialism versus free market capitalism. Turns out, to everybody's shock, free market capitalism wins by 59-16. Now, the key is all three words. Young people who've just been brainwashed will come out, and if you just say the word socialism, they go, well, isn't that kind of a nice thing? You drop big government in front of socialism, they go, are you nuts? Because they know big government doesn't work. If you just say capitalism, that's one thing, but if you say free market, suddenly it's a lot more positive. So we have a potential to run a campaign this fall of 59% who are free market conservative capitalists versus the 16% who are big government socialists, and then just remind everybody, and this is really, really important. The failures we are living through that are causing us pain are failures of policy, not failures of personality. This is not a cognitive problem in the White House. Now, why am I saying that? Because one of the things I learned was that in 1975, when she became opposition leader, Margaret Thatcher set out to destroy socialism. She pounded on it every day. It was immoral, it was illegal, it was theft, it was destroying Great Britain. By the time she was done, there's a great small book by Berlinski called There Is No Alternative, Why Margaret Thatcher Matters. By the time she was done, no openly left-wing leader has been elected Prime Minister of Britain in 40 years. Now that should be our goal. Our goal is not just to beat some doddering guy who can barely read his script. Our goal should be to make sure that AOC spends her entire life in a tiny minority in utter frustration, never once mattering. Finally, and this will again be, it's going to take your help, an American tsunami to serve the American people. I mean, I'm a Lincoln Republican. Government of the people, by the people, for the people. Do I take lots of polls? You betcha. You know why? I think I have an obligation to represent the people, and I'm not arrogant enough to think I can sit in some room and fantasize my version of the people. So I want the people to tell me, one of the things I learned from Kellyanne, that it's actually helpful to listen to the people, not just narrowly, but broadly, culturally, anthropologically. Who are they? Who do they want to become? What's their future? Because I had studied under Reagan and worked with Reagan, I'd learned there's a wonderful small book I recommend to all of you called The Education of Ronald Reagan. It is amazing. It's his time at General Electric. And what he learned was, he spent 8 years there, he learned that if you moved the people, the leaders had to follow. So Reagan never negotiated directly with the Democrats. Reagan recruited the American people, as he liked to say. He would shine the light on the American people so they would turn up the heat on Congress. Now that's basically what we did. Every single item in the contract was 70% or better. We wouldn't put anything in the contract that wasn't at least 70%. Well, what did that mean? It meant you're a Democrat. You go home. At 70%, guess what your voters tell you? They like it. And I'll close with this because it's so different than what you've been taught by the left-wing media. On the items of the contract that were voted on, we averaged 63 Democrats voting with us. That was the average. And we did it deliberately because we wanted to represent, it was a contract with America, not a contract with Republicans. You have a chance, and I really mean this, you have a chance to be the generation that ends the Rooseveltian machine after almost 100 years. You have a chance to relaunch this country with such energy, such enthusiastic pursuit of happiness, such belief in the rights God has given us, that 30 or 40 years from now, people look back and wonder, why did the Chinese or the Russians or anybody else think they were going to play? Dictatorships can't play with the free people if the free people have good leadership. And this is a pretty good start at getting that. I urge each of you, and I really mean this, I'm here today, I've been doing this since August of 1958. And I'm here today because I'm a citizen. The job of citizens is to save the republic. This is your job this year and in 24. Thank you, and God bless you.